Grant Whitfield sat alone at a corner table in Maple and Vine, staring at the door every time it swung open, his heart lurching each time a stranger walked in who wasn't her, until the woman in pale blue scrubs, hair still pinned back from a 12-hour shift, stepped through the entrance and said the words that would change everything. "I'm sorry. I wore my work uniform." What happened next would teach him more about love than any first date ever could. Before we continue, if you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in stories that remind us people are worth the risk, hit like, drop a comment, share this with someone who needs it, and subscribe to Whispering Tales Stories. We tell the tales that stay with you. It was a bright Saturday afternoon in early October, the kind of golden light that made even a small-town diner look like something out of a painting. Grant had not been on a date in almost 4 years, not since his wife Colleen died in a car accident on a rain-slicked highway, leaving him to raise their 6-year-old daughter Poppy alone. He ran a modest hardware store on Elm Street, the kind of place where regulars knew his name and asked about his little girl, but he had built walls so high around his heart that even his own sister had stopped trying to set him up. This time, though, she had insisted, practically begging him to give it one chance. One afternoon, 1 cup of coffee with a woman named Marissa Ortiz, a nurse from the county hospital who worked long, brutal shifts in the ICU. When Marissa walked in, she was flustered, her cheeks flushed, apologizing before she even sat down. Her shift had run 3 hours over because a patient had coded twice, and she refused to leave until she knew he was stable. She hadn't had time to go home and change, hadn't had time to fix her hair or put on the dress she'd picked out the night before, and she stood there in her wrinkled scrubs with tired eyes, bracing herself for disappointment, the way she had braced herself so many times before when men took one look at her, exhaustion, and decided she wasn't worth the effort. Grant looked at her for a long moment, and something in his chest, something that had been frozen since Colleen's funeral, began to thaw. He stood, pulled out her chair, and told her that she had nothing to apologize for, that a person who stayed 3 extra hours to make sure a stranger lived was exactly the kind of person he wanted to sit across from. Marissa blinked back sudden tears, unused to being seen so plainly, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she let herself relax. They talked for 2 hours that should have been 30 minutes. Grant learned that Marissa had become a nurse after her younger brother spent months in the hospital as a teenager, and how she'd watched the night shift. Nurses treat him not as a chart number but as a scared kid, and decided then that she wanted to give that same dignity to strangers. Marissa learned that Grant closed his store early every Wednesday to coach Poppy's soccer team, even though he had never played soccer himself and mostly just cheered very loudly and occasionally kicked the ball the wrong direction. She laughed so hard at that story that the couple at the next table smiled at them without meaning to, but as the afternoon wore on, Grant felt the old fear creeping back in, the fear that had kept him from dating anyone in 4 years. It wasn't really about the uniform, and it wasn't about the date going well or badly. It was about Poppy. He had watched his daughter cry herself to sleep more nights than he could count, asking why her mommy wasn't coming back, and he had promised himself that he would never bring another woman into her life unless he was certain, absolutely certain, that she wouldn't leave too. He told Marissa this gently, honestly, expecting her to pull back the way people sometimes did when grief got too heavy to hold politely across a table. Instead, Marissa reached over and set her hand lightly on his, and told him that she understood loss in a way most people never had to. She had spent years sitting with dying patients and grieving families, holding hands that no one else would hold, and she said that love worth having was never about certainty. It was about choosing to show up anyway, day after day, even when your scrubs were wrinkled and your heart was tired. She wasn't asking him to promise forever on a first date. She was only asking him to let her meet his daughter, to let her be one more steady person in Poppy's life if he ever felt ready. Grant didn't feel ready that day, but 3 weeks later, after 2 more coffee dates and 1 long phone call where Marissa talked him through a panic attack he'd had on the anniversary of Colleen's death, he decided he was ready enough. He invited Marissa to Poppy's Saturday soccer game, the bright afternoon sun spilling over the field, orange slices in a cooler, other parents shouting encouragement from folding chairs. Poppy was suspicious at first, the way children who have lost a parent often are, watching Marissa from a careful distance, refusing to make eye contact, kicking the ball extra hard whenever Marissa cheered for her. It was during halftime that everything shifted. Poppy tripped chasing a loose ball and scraped her knee badly enough to cry. And before Grant could even reach her, Marissa was already kneeling in the grass, her nurse's instincts taking over, calmly checking the wound, talking to Poppy in a soft, steady voice about how brave she was, how this kind of scrape always looked worse than it really was, how she had bandaged hundreds of knees just like this one. Poppy stopped crying almost immediately, staring up at this stranger with wide eyes, and asked if Marissa fixed people for a job. When Marissa said yes, Poppy asked if she could fix broken hearts too. Marissa glanced at Grant, then looked back at Poppy, and said that she was certainly going to try. Over the following months, Marissa became a quiet, steady presence in their lives, never rushing, never pushing, simply showing up. She learned Poppy's favorite bedtime stories and her fear of thunderstorms. She brought home leftover, hospital cafeteria muffins that became a running joke between them. She sat with Grant on the porch after Poppy fell asleep, listening as he finally spoke aloud all the grief he had swallowed for 4 years, and she never once made him feel broken for it. Slowly, painfully, beautifully, Grant felt himself coming back to life, not by forgetting Colleen, but by making room for someone new to stand beside her memory instead of replacing it. The following spring, on another bright, ordinary afternoon, Grant took Marissa back to Maple and Vine, the same corner table where they'd first sat. This time she wasn't in scrubs. She was in the pale green dress she'd originally planned to wear on their first date, the one she'd never gotten the chance to put on. Grant told her that he had fallen in love with her exactly as she was that first day, tired and wrinkled and apologizing for nothing, and that he never wanted her to feel like she had to be anything other than herself again. Then he got down on one knee right there beside the same table and asked her to marry him. Marissa said yes before he even finished the question, and across the diner, an elderly couple who had been quietly watching began to clap, joined quickly by the entire room, strangers cheering for two people who had found each other in the most unremarkable, uniform wrinkled way imaginable. If this story touched your heart even a little, if it reminded you that the right person will never ask you to apologize for being tired, for working hard, for simply being human, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to Whispering Tales Stories for more stories like this one. And before you go, drop the word second chance in the comments below if you believe, like Marissa and Grant did, that love doesn't need perfect circumstances to be real. Grant and Marissa married that autumn in a small backyard ceremony, with Poppy as the flower girl, scattering petals down a path, lined with the same golden light that had filled the diner the day they met. Poppy, now 7, stood beside them as Marissa slipped a ring onto Grant's finger, and when the officiant asked if anyone wished to say anything, Poppy raised her hand and said simply that she was glad the nurse lady had fixed her. Daddy's heart after all. There wasn't a dry eye among the guests, and somewhere in that quiet, sunlit yard, 2 broken families became one whole one, proof that sometimes the most ordinary apology, spoken by someone brave enough to show up exactly as they are, can be the beginning of an extraordinary love.